It was really amazing. Let's see, last Saturday, not yesterday, but 8 days ago, we had over 40 volunteers in the parking lot here giving away a semi-truck full of food. That's 40,000 pounds of food. And there are volunteers from the front church. There are volunteers from the neighborhood. The Bluffdale Fire Department came out and gave Powerades and water and energy drinks to our volunteers. The Miss Bluffdale pageant contestants volunteered. The community came together, and it was really beautiful. We say at the front church we want to be a church not just in the community, but a church for the community. And I feel like we saw that happen. And it was amazing. And the more amazing thing, we get to do it again. So March 27th, 3 weeks from yesterday, I think 3 weeks, March 27th, we are doing it again. And there's a sign up on the welcome table to the out front. But please sign up. And like we've shared, one of the beautiful things about the Farmers to Family event is that you and I both know people who might, no matter what you say, and you can say, "Oh, our church is ready for company. You don't have to believe before you can belong. You can come, you can check things out." No matter what you say, some people are still quite nervous to come to a new church. And this Saturday morning volunteer opportunity gives you a chance to build a bridge with your neighbors, with your friends, with your family, with people you care about, and say, "Hey, just come volunteer with me." And then they might meet some people from the front church. Maybe they'll be more open to coming in the future. It's a really incredible opportunity to bless our community and to help your friends, family, and neighbors take steps towards Jesus. So, amazing. It's happening again. You should sign up. Guys, I'm Nate. I am the lead pastor of the front church. And this morning feels a little wild for us and for me. Got some unexpected things going on at home. We got some volunteers that are able to be here because of just some stuff comes up. We live in a coronavirus world. Sometimes coronavirus world means some of us can't be here on a Sunday morning. And so it's been a little bit of a wild week. And also we're blessed and fortunate to normally have worship leaders who lead. But this morning, sometimes I'm my own backup plan or my own plan. And so sometimes that means I have to do both worship leading and speaking, which is the case this morning. So thanks for hanging with us. We're in our preseason. And we talk about this often, but our preseason is not our season. But during the preseason, you can still hear Jesus' story. During the preseason, you can still invite people to experience Jesus' story. During the preseason, you can worship because of Jesus' story. You can be community formed by Jesus' story. You can still do a lot of these things in the preseason as a community. But we have been waiting to have our grand opening until we can have large gatherings in a post-COVID-19 world. And so what we experience on a Sunday morning right now is going to look different once we have a grand opening. So right now, this is kind of how our auditorium looks. And this is fine. This is suiting us for a COVID-19 world. This is where we're at. But we're also just using some equipment that some churches have graciously given us. But we've also made an equipment purchase. And what this auditorium is going to look like in the future is more like that. So that's where we're headed. We're going to need more volunteers. We're going to need more setup, team people. But we want to transform this space. The area that you walk through to get here. Right now it just looks like a big empty room. But we're going to change that. We're going to transform that area into our cafe, where people, when they come in, they can grab a cup of coffee. They can meet some of their friends. We want people to, when they walk through the doors, go like, "Whoa, I thought I was coming to a school." Or this feels like a church, looks like a church. And so we're going to transform that area into our cafe. And then down the hallway is our most important space. And that's going to be our kid front area, where instead of kids joining us for half the service and then doing the kid front moment and then going back, once we have enough volunteers, we're working towards the moment where, with our grand opening, kids will be checked in prior. Kids will go back to the summit. They'll have an age-appropriate worship time where they'll sing some songs, they'll hear about Jesus in age-appropriate ways, and they'll have a blast, and then they'll break off into age-appropriate classrooms, all of these spaces being transformed into kid-front spaces. And while they're over there, we'll be over here, hearing about Jesus and having our time. And so that's where we're headed, but this is where we are right now, and this is the phase we're in right now. So welcome to the Front Church and our preseason. When Robin and I were dating 11 years ago, I worked at a Starbucks. And one time, we were dating long distance, and so I decided I'm going to mail her an empty Starbucks cup. And so I got the Starbucks cup, I marked it up with her favorite drink, and I wrote a little note on it that said, Robin, I wish I were on the other side of the counter with you. And I mailed this to her, and I also edited the caution at the bottom of the cup. Just crossed out a few words to send a message to her about my feelings towards her. You're extremely hot. But I love my wife. I wish you could meet her this morning, but she'll be here again next week. But when I worked at Starbucks, I had a coworker named Stacy. And sometimes when you're working and it's a slow night, you get to talking with your coworkers. And Stacy and I got to talking, and she shared with me that she was once very religious. From the time she was in middle school to late in high school, she was a regular part of a church and a youth group. But then something happened with her older brother late in high school for her. And that is, her older brother went off to college. He got his girlfriend pregnant. And then Stacy and her family began to experience something at the church. Not like a warm embrace, not a we'll get through this together, but kind of judgment. They felt some distance. People kind of moved not towards them, but away from them. Stacy's friends moved not towards her in this difficult moment of her life, but away from her. And she said, I left. I was done. 11th grade, she leaves the church. She starts going to college, and her freshman year of college, she's like, I'm going to give this one more shot. So she visits a couple churches, a couple campus organizations at college, and she says, I just experienced the same thing. And so she left for good. She doesn't consider herself religious anymore. You know what? Sometimes religion can actually get in the way of Jesus. And I have a feeling that Stacy experienced that. Have you ever been in a place where you felt out of place, but what you really wanted to feel was in place? Right? Maybe you start dating someone, and you go to meet their family, and you're accustomed to your family talking about sports, and her family talks about guns. And you're like, I don't know what to say here. Or maybe you're in a new workplace, and your first day of work, and you're really excited, and then you get to work, and it becomes clear right away that the people at that workplace have been working together for a minute. And you just feel like this is going to be hard to break into this environment. Maybe you're from a different country and English is not your first language, and this is just hard. You can get around and you can talk, but like your heart language, sometimes it's hard to fit. Or maybe you're like Stacy, or you know people like Stacy, and they're curious about God and they want community, but they didn't seem to want you. It's not a good feeling to feel out of place when you want to feel in place. So last week, we started a new teaching series on practices. What are the things that make the Front Church the Front Church? Because at the Front Church, our biggest desire is we want to invite as many people as possible to experience Jesus' story. And so because we want that to happen, as many people as possible to experience Jesus' story, we prepare for company, we take our next step, and we are always adapting. Because we want to always make sure that we're doing the things that need to be done so that as many people as possible are invited to experience Jesus' story. And last week we talked about how we prepare for company, and that was actually a part 1. And this morning we're going to talk about part 2. Last week I asked, what story does your Sunday routine tell? Right? Does your Sunday routine, does the way that you roll on a Sunday morning, does it tell the story of Jesus' invitation and welcome? Or does it tell another story? Maybe your Sunday routine on tells the story that the most important people for you are your friends that you see at church. They're the most important. Because every time you walk through the doors, you're looking for your friends, you're hanging with your friends. Maybe your Sunday routine tells the story that you're the most important. I'm here for me. I'm here for what God can give, for what I can get from God, right? Maybe your Sunday morning story tells a story that you think you're like supposed to be a reservoir of blessing. Oftentimes at the front church, we have to remind people, I had to remind myself, I'm not a reservoir of blessing, I'm a river. I'm blessed to bless. We experience God, so then God changes us and we bless the world around us. That's how it's supposed to work. What story does your Sunday routine tell? This morning, in Prepare for Company Part 2, we want to talk about how the front church is a place where you can belong before you believe. We expect our company to belong before they believe. So scripture will be on your screen, but you can also open your Bibles to the book of Luke. We're going to be in the book of Luke, chapter 5, big number 5. And Jesus is always upsetting the religious people of his day. Why? Because he continues to insist that those the religious deem far from God aren't actually far from God. And sometimes religion can get in the way of Jesus. And so at this moment in the story, Jesus had called his first disciples. He'd done some miracles. There's people in the story who are amazed, and that takes us to this point. And Rob, would you mind getting me my water right there? I'm sipping on coffee, and I should be sipping on water right now. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. So Luke chapter 5, big number 5. This is about 3/4 of the way back in my Bible. Luke is right after the book of Mark, right before the book of John. And we're going to go big number 5 and then little number 27. Luke 5:27. After kind of the hype, after the crowds are amazed, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed Jesus. We got to talk for a minute about tax collectors in Jesus' day. Because the thing about tax collectors in Jesus' day is they didn't belong anywhere with anyone. They didn't belong with their fellow Jews. You see, the Jewish people were actually being ruled by the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, the Jewish people longed for their freedom, but the Roman Empire, they were basically like a colony of Rome. They were ruled by Rome. And a tax collector, what a tax collector would do is a tax collector would do Rome's tax collecting towards the Jewish people as a Jew. A tax collector was seen as a sellout. How can you do that to our people? How can you sell us out like that? How can you do Rome's bidding for them? You know why Rome taxed people is to remind people who's in charge. We're in charge, not you. And so tax collectors had the lowest social status you can imagine at that time. They were at the very bottom. They didn't belong with their fellow Jews. Tax collectors didn't belong with Romans either, because the Romans, they were just pawns, right? The tax collectors were just pawns used by Rome to do their bidding, but they didn't really care about them. And so all a tax collector had was one another. And can you imagine Levi's surprise? It says Jesus saw. It says he saw a tax collector. So he notices him. Most people walking past the tax collectors, they don't want to notice the tax collectors. Tax collectors are at the bottom. But Jesus notices them and he stops. I guess Jesus' reputation is getting around, because then it says he gets up, leaves everything, and follows Jesus. I just imagine a life of longing to belong for so long. Longing to belong. Not belonging with your fellow Jews, not belonging with Romans, probably through a lot of your own choices too, and you realize I've kind of buried myself here. Like Levi probably realizes that. but a desire to belong. And Jesus says, come in. And he goes. Let's keep going. So then Levi left everything and followed him. And then Levi held a great banquet. That is Greek for party. For Jesus at his house. And a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" So Levi throws a big party, and the thing we got to know is when you eat with someone in Jesus' day, that was more than just like, hey, come over for dinner. That was an act of radical solidarity and acceptance. It was interpreted as that. So to eat with someone was not just, oh yeah, we happen to be free, let's do dinner. It was I'm with you. It was an act of radical community. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they're beside themselves. Like they're the Bible students of Jesus' day. They know their Bibles. And they're beside themselves. And so they complain. How could Jesus do this? You know the Greek translation of the word complain there is the word tweeted. They tweeted. See, they don't understand. They don't understand something. And what they don't understand is that you belong before you believe. For them, it's believe and then belong. Until you believe, we're going to keep you at arm's distance. We're going to keep you away. But that's not the story that Jesus' life is telling. Let's keep going. And so Jesus answered them, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Jesus' life tells a story. And Jesus' life tells a story that people belong before they believe. But Jesus' life isn't the only life that tells a story in this story. Levi's life tells a story. And Levi's life tells a story that Jesus' love changes the world. You see, he had every reason to feel shame. He'd sold out his people. He'd sold out his family. Who he'd associated with the past, who he's associating with in his present, his choices. He had reason to feel shame from the religious community. He had reason to feel shame from the Romans who are just like, you're just doing a bidding for us. He had reason to feel shame from his family. And we know Levi's, don't we? How dare you, Levi? How do we try and change Levi's? We shame them, right? We'll tweet them. We'll cancel them. We'll disassociate with them in the name of the common good. In the name of the common good, we're going to try and change you by shame. Or maybe that's not really our approach. Maybe with the Levi's that we know that maybe we shouldn't do that, but we want to disassociate. We're afraid to associate with them just because what will other people think if we're hanging with Levi? Don't you know what he tweeted? Don't you know what she tweeted? Don't you know what that group thinks? Don't you know how they're viewed by everyone else? What will they think? And so we just keep our distance from Levi and his friends. You see, we might say love changes the world, but often we act as if shame changes the world. And that's what's going on here. Levi's been surrounded by people who say love changes the world, but their action is the path to change is shame. And Jesus won't have this. This is not how he works. For Jesus, it's always belong before you believe. You know, Jesus didn't require belief before welcoming people. It's true. Read the Gospels. It's true. He doesn't require belief before welcoming people. In fact, track with me here. It's because Jesus wants people to believe in him that he doesn't require belief before welcome. Right? It's because Jesus wants people's lives to change that he doesn't require it before welcoming them. And when this is his approach, people make false judgments. Here's a couple highlights. Luke 5:30, the Pharisees, the religious people are like, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus, Luke 7:34, they call Jesus a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Luke 19:7, people are complaining he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Jesus, you're down with tax collectors. You're down with sinners. You eating with them is you are making affirmation about how they live and their lifestyle. So what do they do? What do they do to Jesus in the story? Well, they don't tweet, but we would. They tweet, they cancel, they disassociate, they get defensive, and they plug their ears. They don't want to hear what he's saying. Because they might say love changes the world, but their path to change is shame changes the world. And Levi's life was headed somewhere. It was headed one way. You follow his tax collector trajectory over. This guy didn't have any qualifications. He didn't have any virtue. He didn't have a good reputation. And Jesus didn't say, well, your resume kind of stinks, so I'm going to have to go somewhere else. He says, come on. For Jesus, it's always belong before you believe, which is really good news for us. What type of world is created when we adopt the tactics of the Pharisees? Right? The Pharisees, the religious people of Jesus' day, their tactic is shame changes the world. So what happens when we try and change the world through shame? In my experience, what happens is when we try and shame people into change, when we try and cancel, when we try and disassociate, when we try and put them at a distance until they change. When that is our approach, instead of change that we would like to see produced, we want them to change. We want something to happen that's different. But instead of change, what happens is the lines get not thinner but thicker. And feet get planted. And it's just more entrenched in the view or the situation that we want them to leave when we adopt the tactics of shame. If you don't like me, you can unfriend me. Lines are thicker. This isn't new, right? You just look back 2,000 years, and you see it in Jesus' day too. They're doing the same thing. But Jesus is giving us a way forward. And instead of shame, when Jesus turns to Levi, you know what he says? He says, you belong even if they say you don't. And he hangs with Levi and his friends. And what happens to Levi? Levi doesn't continue the trajectory he's on. His life is radically changed. In the tradition of the church, we know Levi to be Matthew, the tax collector. And Matthew is a big deal. He actually pens a gospel. He's so captivated by the story of Jesus. His life is so changed by the story of Jesus that he wants the world to know about Jesus. So he writes a whole gospel. He can't be quiet about it. And the thing that we need to begin to recognize about Jesus' story is that it levels the playing field. Jesus' cross is Jesus died on a cross for the sins of the world. Your sins and my sins. The entrance requirements to become a Jesus follower are to confess that we don't have it all together. It's admitting we have screwed it up. It's not impressing Jesus. It's saying we have not impressed Jesus. But he's loved us anyway. He's forgiven us anyway. And so here's the thing. With the cross, it levels the playing field. So it's not those sinners over there. Or it's not they're what's wrong with the world. It's them and us and everyone else has something within us. Sin. That is wrong with the world. And Jesus doesn't say, clean yourself up and then come to me. He says, you belong even if they say you don't. Come on. There's no room for holier than thou with Jesus because the very entrance requirements are you didn't have it all together. I don't have it all together. We don't have it all together. That's why Jesus had it on a cross. So then we can actually level about the heaviest, the darkest, the hardest parts of our lives because we have no one to impress. You needed it. I needed it. We needed it. And Jesus' story births a new world. It births a new community, which I dream of the Front Church becoming, admitting sin in our own lives and one another's lives, admitting our need for Jesus' cross, and admitting our need for God's presence to live within us. We all needed it. And so, yes, there are people who will take Jesus' story and they'll use parts of Jesus' story as a weapon. They'll put it in their arsenal and they'll use it as a weapon to beat people down. Those people do exist. But here's the thing. They aren't being formed by the story of Jesus. They're simply picking parts that fit the story they already assumed is true of the world. Because religion can get in the way of Jesus. But a good long look at Jesus, a good long look at how Jesus deals with people that others deem far from God, a good long look at Jesus, and you cannot adopt the tactics of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. A good long look at Jesus realizes he operates differently. Therefore, we operate differently. There's a quote by Alan Culpepper that I wanted to read. He says that the early church, rather than associating with those who bring honor to them, bring shame upon themselves. So there was a social strata, a certain way that society worked and a certain way society functioned. And if you were to associate with some groups of people, you brought shame on yourself. And no, you don't do that. You don't interrupt this social order. You don't interrupt this social strata. But the early church was marked by constantly bringing shame upon themselves from the outside because they kept welcoming. They kept moving towards people that everyone else says, no, they're far away. And don't miss this. The early church was marked where a people who public shame had lost its power on them in light of Jesus' story. Don't you want to be someone who public shame loses its power on you? Man, I do. Get a clear look at Jesus and move towards people regardless of what other people are going to say about me. I dream of that marking our community. At the Front Church, we prepare for company by being the place where people will belong before they believe. And it's because we want people to believe in Jesus. It's because we want their worlds and their lives changed and our world changed that we will let people belong before they believe. Jesus' story interrupts the shame, changes the world's cycle. It interrupts the cycle of division and disunity that we see our world spiraling down with a different story that his love changes the world, and our world so needs this. Our world needs this, meaning when we're here on a Sunday morning, we get to actually practice a way that the world needs us to live all the time. A place, people and spaces and communities where people can belong before they believe, where we believe that the strongest tactic of change is Jesus' love and not some shame. For the Front Church, what does it look like for you to belong before you believe? It looks like 4 things, and a lot more than 4, but I know 4 things. The first is people who aren't following Jesus won't feel like outsiders. That's really important for us. We're going to work really hard so that people who aren't following Jesus, when they come here, can feel like they can try and figure things out and not feel like they're the odd one out. You're just with a group of people figuring things out together. The second thing, transparency and authenticity are more important than correct answers. Doesn't mean correct answers aren't important. When the Apostle Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong. Meaning you can say the right thing and the wrong way and it be the wrong thing. So correct answers are important. We believe real true things about Jesus. We believe they really matter. But we want to create a community where people can be honest about where they're at with Jesus. Number 3, you can get involved and serve in a multiplicity of ways at the front without needing to fake belief. There are certain things at the front where people need to be followers of Jesus and have a relationship with him to have that role. There are also a lot of things that people can just do and get involved in and serve and still be figuring that out. That's okay. And the 4th thing is that we got to remember that Jesus' harshest words were reserved for those already believing, not for those on the margins. On Sundays, you guys, we get to prepare for company, both in the preseason and in preparation for our post-grand opening, post-COVID-19 world. We get to practice this every single Sunday morning, which helps us then practice it every single day of our lives. And our world so desperately needs a world that's dividing and splitting and yelling and tweeting and canceling, spiraling. Our world desperately needs Jesus' people to be people who adopt different tactics and look more like Jesus than the religious people we discover in this story this morning. Shame didn't work for Levi, but you know what worked? Jesus' love. You belong even if they say you don't. And his life was changed. Let's pray.